Avatar: The Last Airbender has so many great characters, and a few that often get overlooked are those that belong to the squad called the Freedom Fighters. They're present throughout the story in the early stages of the show to the story after the series ended. In this video, I'm going to explain the life and the entire timeline of each member in the Freedom Fighters. The Freedom Fighters consist of 6 kids, all of whom were affected by the 100-Year War. There's Jet, whose parents were killed by Fire Nation soldiers right in front of him when he was only 8 years old, and that day changed him forever. There's Longshot, whose town was burned down by the Fire Nation, and after that, he rarely spoke. There's the Duke, who was an orphan who never really had a home, and he was recruited by the Freedom Fighters when they caught him stealing their food. There's Smellerbee, who ran away from home after the Fire Nation took over her parents' land. There's Sneers, whose parents were killed by the Fire Nation. And there's Pipsqueak, who was also affected by the war and needed somewhere to go. They all found a home and a family when they joined the Freedom Fighters, and they had a new purpose in life, to take down and get revenge on the Fire Nation. Jet was their leader, and rightly so, because he was the one that was giving the Fire Nation more trouble than any of them, and he was the most skilled in combat. He was a good leader and treated his team right. He did nice things, like while celebrating, he would recount some members' best moments after a victory. They all looked up to Jet and were very loyal to him, even if some of his plans weren't always ethical. Banding together, they created the ultimate hideout in the tops of trees, ensuring that the Fire Nation could not see them through the leaves. It was full of walkways connecting multiple trees, each tree having a deck space and a tent over it. It also had a zip line and a rope that pulled you up to gain access. This became their home, and they thrived up in the trees, all having something to live for. It was not just the Freedom Fighters that lived there though. There were many other kids that were also hurt by the war, and the Freedom Fighters did all they could to care for them and steal food and supplies for them. When the Fire Nation took over a nearby Earth Kingdom town, they spent the next few years giving them hell, ambushing their troops, cutting their supply lines off, and doing anything they could to mess with them. Their main goal at this point was to drive the Fire Nation out of the Earth Kingdom town for good and free the citizens that lived there. While at their hideout up in the trees, they were waiting to ambush a big army of Fire Nation soldiers to get their supplies, but they realized that they could not do this without a distraction. The perfect time arrived, however, when they crossed paths with Team Avatar for the first time and rescued them from the army of soldiers. They took the soldiers down using their individual skills. Jet used his tiger hook swords, the Duke used his shortness to overtake soldiers, Longshot used his bow and arrow, Pipsqueak and Sneers used their size and strength, and Smellerbee used their overall fighting ability. They befriended Team Avatar and took them to their hideout, and there, Jet became close with Katara. They bonded over losing their parents to the Fire Nation, but Sokka did not trust Jet. Sokka witnessed Jet go after an innocent old man and saw a different side of him, a side that showed how far gone Jet really was after the Fire Nation had taken so much from him. He showed no mercy to anything that had to do with the Fire Nation, even if they were innocent. Sokka told him that going after this old man did not feel right, but Jet replied saying that it had to be done. Jet and the Freedom Fighters went on a mission in the middle of the night to set up explosives to blow up the dam next to the town, as they planned on flooding the whole area to wipe out the Fire Nation soldiers, but this would also kill all of the innocent citizens that lived there as well. Smellerbee and Pipsqueak found Sokka listening, and Jet had the two of them take Sokka away so he couldn't stop them. While taking him away, however, Smellerbee and Pipsqueak got stuck in animal traps and Sokka escaped. Jet then had Katara and Aang fill water up next to the dam, but when the two figured out what Jet had planned, the two of them turned on him. They fought him until Katara pinned him up against a tree with her water bending. Longshot made the dam explode before they could stop it, however, but to the fury of Jet, Sokka had gotten everybody out of the village before the dam blew up. They left Jet pinned up against the tree and told him that he had become the very thing that he wanted to destroy. Now that the village they were protecting had been exposed to their plan to sacrifice them all, the Freedom Fighters had to leave their home. This ended their operations in the hideout, and the kids not part of the Freedom Fighters that lived there were forced to find a new home and a new source for shelter, food, and water. 3 of Jet's own lost faith in him as well, and the Duke, Pipsqueak, and Sneers left their leader. Sneers went off to Dao to live with his uncle, and the Duke and Pipsqueak left and stuck together. Sneers eventually found love in his new home and became romantically involved with Corey, an earthbender of Fire Nation descent and the daughter of the mayor of Dao. Jet, Smellerbee, and Longshot stuck together and were the core of the Freedom Fighters. After his encounter with Team Avatar, Jet realized that they were right and he wanted to put his past behind him. To do that, he decided to go to Ba Sing Se, a place where many refugees went to get away from the Fire Nation and to start a new life. While on the boat, they ran into Zuko and his uncle Iroh, and together, the 3 of them worked with Zuko to steal food from the captains. They then gave out the food that they had stolen to all of the passengers, and they themselves ate well that night. While in the boat, Iroh called Smellerby a young man, and she became mad, saying that she was a girl. Seeing that she was upset, Longshot went over to her and comforted her by touching her shoulder, and though he didn't say anything, Smellerby knew that he was telling her that as long as she's confident in who she is, it doesn't matter what other people think. She then thanked him, and he nodded to her. Meanwhile, Jet talked to Zuko and Iroh, saying that he was excited to enter Ba Sing Se, as he had heard that inside the walls, people ate like this every day. When they got close to the city, Jet approached Zuko and said that they were both outcasts, and said that they had to stick together and watch each other's backs, because no one else would. Jet was excited to recruit Zuko to the Freedom Fighters, and when they arrived in the city, he said this to Longshot and Smellerby. Smellerby disagreed with this, however, saying that they didn't know anything about him, and that they were trying to go on a straighter path. When Jet asked him to join, however, Zuko refused, and as he was walking back to his uncle, Jet saw Iroh use firebending to warm his tea up, and realized that they were firebenders. Jet became obsessed with this, and though Longshot and Smellerby told him to drop it because they put that life behind them, Jet's obsession to destroy the Fire Nation overpowered his good senses. He went after Zuko, trying to make him firebend, and the two fought using their swords. It was a very even match, but before they could find out who would win, the fight was broken up by Dai Li agents, and they took Jet away. Smellerby and Longshot sadly watched their leader get dragged away, and they disappeared into the crowd. The Dai Li agents took Jet down to Lake Laogai and brainwashed him, making him think that there was no war in Ba Sing Se, and they made him forget about this incident. After Jet was gone for a long time, Smellerby and Longshot got worried and started looking all over for him. When Jet was returned to the public, he found a picture of Appa that said he was missing, and he approached Team Avatar saying that he could help. He told them that he had changed, and when Katara said that he was lying, Toph said that she could tell through her earthbending that he was telling the truth. While he was with Team Avatar, Smellerby and Longshot saw him and ran over to him, but he had no memory of anything that they were talking about, not even remembering coming to Ba Sing Se with them, as he thought he came alone. Toph then said that they were both telling the truth, and they realized that Jet was brainwashed. They brought the truth out of him, however, when Katara used her waterbending healing on his mind. Remembering Lake Laogai, they all went down there to save Appa, but they were met by Dai Li agents and Longfang, and a fight broke out. During the fight, Longfang put Jet's brainwashing back into place and told him to kill Aang, but when Aang told him to remember who he was, to remember that he was a freedom fighter, it brought him back, and he realized that no one could stand in the way of who he was. He went after Longfang, but Longfang earthbended a giant chunk of earth that smashed Jet right in the chest and knocked him to the ground. Jet was seriously injured and could not move. When the others arrived, they all looked down on him in sadness, and Katara tried to heal him, but it didn't work. Smellerby then told the others to go on, and said that they would take care of Jet. But when Katara said no, Longshot spoke for the first time in years, telling them that they'd take care of him, as he was their leader. Jet then told Katara that he'd be fine, but as they walked away, Toph told the others that he was lying. Smellerby cried as she sat next to Jet, and Longshot raised his bow and arrow, ready to defend his team and his best friends. Jet eventually died in Lake Laogai, and Smellerby and Longshot were forced to leave their leader's body and escape. Meanwhile, two other members of the Freedom Fighters, the Duke and Pipsqueak, went off on their own, and they were forced to become thieves just to get food. One day they entered a ship, planning to steal food from them, but they were caught by Team Avatar, as the boat they had entered was Sokka and Katara's father's boat. They ended up joining Team Avatar on the ship, and they became surprisingly helpful, at least when they weren't getting into trouble. They were part of a plan where they purposely destroyed their ship and took smaller boats to an island. Then when the Fire Nation found the wrecked ship, they sent word to the Fire Nation that the Water Tribe was dead. And after sending that, the team entered the Fire Nation ship and took it over. On this ship, they entered the Fire Nation and posed as Fire Nation soldiers. Team Avatar eventually left the ship, and Pipsqueak and the Duke stuck with the Water Tribe. They accompanied them as they rounded up everyone Sokka had told his father to find, going all over the map, and when the time came, they were ready to fight on the Day of the Black Sun. The Duke and Pipsqueak fought hard in the invasion, but ultimately it was a failure, and the group was forced to surrender. Pipsqueak and the Duke were forced to split up, and the Duke went with the kids to escape, and Pipsqueak stayed with the adults to surrender. Pipsqueak was sent to a prison near the Fire Nation capital and stayed there for the remainder of the war. After the kids escaped the invasion, the Duke was temporarily part of Team Avatar when they occupied the Western Air Temple, and there, the Duke, Haru, and Tio explored the temple's many secrets together. When Azula attacked the temple, however, the Duke split up with the main members of Team Avatar and escaped with everyone else through a tunnel. When the war finally ended, Pipsqueak was released from prison, and he and the Duke were reunited at Zukos Coronation. 1 year after the war ended, Smellerby and Longshot reunited with Sneers and Yu Dao, where Sneers was still romantically involved with the Earthbender of Fire Nation descent named Corey, who also happened to be the mayor of Yu Dao's daughter, but Sneers kept this a secret from his friends. Smellerby became the new leader of the Freedom Fighters, and she quickly began planning the whole reason why she and Longshot went there, to protest the Fire Nation keeping Yu Dao as their own, as it was rightfully Earth Kingdom territory. This was a conflict of interest for Sneers, as his girlfriend was on the opposite side. The Freedom Fighters got excited when Aang arrived, Smellerby asking what the plan of attack was, and she told him that the Freedom Fighters were at his service. To her disappointment, however, Aang said he didn't want to fight, but just talk to Fire Lord Zuko, and Smellerby objected and told Aang that he wasn't getting past the security, and Sneers came up with a solution, saying that he would knock a hole in the gate for him. However, Aang refused and used his glider to go over the gate. When Aang returned, he asked Smellerby and the Freedom Fighters to make the protesters go home, but Smellerby was unhappy by this, and told Aang that he had 3 days until the Freedom Fighters would figure out a solution of their own. Sneers continued to date Corey, but he kept this a secret from the others, not wanting them to know that he was dating the enemy, who was literally training an army to take down the protesters. However, when Corey found out that he was part of the protest, she pushed him to the ground, and the two got into an argument, ending in Corey asking Sneers to choose a side, either her or the Freedom Fighters. He chose Corey's side, and helped attack Aang and Katara as they flew over Yu Dao, and he was caught by the two of them. When Katara called him out, Sneers said that he grew up hating the Fire Nation for what they did to his parents, but when he separated from the Freedom Fighters and came to Yu Dao, he fell in love with someone of Fire Nation descent, and he realized that they weren't so bad. Meanwhile, now that the 3 days had passed, Smellerby was no longer waiting for Aang, and she began her attack on Yu Dao. This led to a giant pillar almost falling on Smellerby, but Aang saved her just in time, and this distracted Aang, allowing a tank to burst through the wall. When going through the wall, Smellerby and Longshot saw Sneers with the Yu Dao resistance, and Smellerby became furious, saying that they had been looking for him. Sneers introduced the Freedom Fighters to Corey, and Smellerby and Corey went at it. Smellerby and Longshot then made fun of Sneers for being fat and being out of Corey's league. Eventually, a full-on battle broke out. Smellerby went head-to-head with Sneers, and Corey and Longshot were running in to join the fight, but Sokka broke the brawl up. The battle came to an end when Aang made the Earth King see that balance of all nations was a good thing, and that they don't have to be separate. He agreed, despite Smellerby yelling at him not to listen to the Fire Nation propaganda. After the battle was over, Sneers stayed in Yu Dao with his uncle and his girlfriend Corey, and Smellerby and Longshot were forced to move on and find another mission to complete. Sneers participated in a Yu Dao meeting alongside Corey, and the meeting discussed theories in government and sort of sided with Sneers and his girlfriend's point of view, and what they were fighting for during the battle in the colony. This meeting was the beginning stepping stone to Republic City, where all 4 nations lived in peace. The story of the Freedom Fighters is an interesting one, and looking at their entire timeline, you really see that they had an impact on so many arcs in the series. Thank you so much for watching, guys. You can follow me on social media to see more of my personal life and see more of this little dude. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook for Movie Flame updates. And I want to give a huge shout out to all my patrons listed below. If you want to be featured in the next video, plus get a bunch of other rewards, become a patron today. Again, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you press that like button and subscribe, and look out for more great videos on the way.